Hey guys, welcome to our week 3 PowerPoint. This week I just really want to focus on just reviewing the steps really quickly of action research, then focusing on the qualitative versus quantitative data, just to make sure we have a clear understanding of the difference of those. And just really quick refreshing and going through the steps of action research that you guys are going to be doing with your project. Hopefully you're already done this part where you've reflected and selecting a focus. We should be at the point where we have selected a focus. Something, again, it could be anything that you want to improve upon anything that frustrates you, something that you would like to make better in your instruction at your school. And then the third step is going to be we're going to collect data. And when we talk about collecting data, we want to, again, do that triangulation where we collect at least 3 different types of data. And today, here on the next couple of slides, we're going to focus on qualitative versus quantitative data. And we want to make sure, excuse me, that we are able to collect some of each type. And when I go through those here in a little bit, hopefully the difference is very clear. And we'll make sure we have at least 2 qualitatives and 1 quantitative, or 2 quantitatives and 1 qualitative, or 2 of each. And it doesn't have to be just 3, but we want to make sure we have at least 3. And so we want to make sure at this point our third step is going to be that we're going to collect data. And we went through this a little bit last week with the example, so we're going to figure out some different ways that we can collect data. Again, don't make it something that's too confusing for you or too much. We're going to figure out some simple, easy ways to collect data. And when you get started on this, if you have issues, if you're not sure, let me know and I'll be glad to brainstorm with you a little bit. After we've collected our data, we're going to analyze and interpret that data. Basically, we're just going to look at all 3 types of data that we've collected, or 4, however many there are, and we're going to say, okay, this piece of data tells me this. What am I seeing from this piece of data? What am I seeing from this piece of data? If I put them all together, am I seeing some trends? Am I seeing some patterns? What am I seeing with all of them? And then at this point, we want to make sure then that we're going to take some kind of action. Now, what we usually do is we do step 5 already right at after step 2. We've skipped the collecting data and analyzing data part. We don't want to do that. We want to collect our data, analyze that data, and then we want to take an action based off of our data. Not just some random action, action that we think is going to help our class, our instruction, whatever that may be, based off of the data. And so we're going to select some kind of action that we're going to take at this point. Once we've done that, we have to collect data again. And the reason we have to do steps 6 and 7 here, because if we don't do this, then again, we don't know if what we have done has really worked or not. We can guess, oh, maybe it worked or maybe it helped a little bit, but collecting data again is going to really tell us, yes, it did work and how much it has helped us. Maybe if it's something that's taken too much time, it cut our time down from 8 minutes down to 4 minutes. So is it perfect? No, but it's cut it down dramatically. Maybe if it's students talking out constantly and it went from 30 interruptions in an hour down to 17. Well, is the problem fixed? No, but it's still, you can see that improvement. And so we want to make sure we collect that data and analyze that data again. And then steps 8 and 9 are just going to be, okay, looking back at the whole process, what did we find out? What are we going to do at this point? And so that's what you're going to do. Hopefully you've kind of gotten a start on that, some thoughts on that for your action research project. And just keep in mind too, for most of us, this is a new thing for us, so we are learning action research. I don't expect anything perfect. I hope you mess up. I think it's okay if you mess up. I've done this several times, and I still mess up. Things don't always go perfectly the way I think they'll go. I realize, oh, I should have collected this data instead, or I should have done it on these days instead, or that's going to happen. It's a learning process, and that's what we want you to do during this. And I really want you to focus on the steps of the process, so that when you do this kind of for real on your own outside of the context of this class, that it could be beneficial to you. All right. When you get started on your action research, really think about what's the purpose of my research. What do I want to accomplish? By the time I'm done with this over the next few weeks, what do I really want to have accomplished? So think about that as you're getting started. Consider any logistics. Like who's part of this? Is it my 5th hour math class? It could be 3 students in a reading group. It could be, my whole class during the hallways or in lunchroom. It could be something like that. What are you really looking at? When are you doing this? I'm going to collect my data on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of, the week of April 20th, whatever that may be. Well, hopefully you don't wait that long. That might be a little too late. But just think about what you're going to do and then when you're going to be doing this. So it's really clear for you. You have that mapped out ahead of time. Where is this taking place at? Is it taking place in your classroom? Is there somewhere else? Really thinking about why you're doing this, and then how are you going to do it. If there's any logistical things as far as how you're going to do it that you need to take care of, make sure you've planned those out. Think of what qualitative, quantitative approaches you might have to use, and we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. And then method or type of research, I'm not going to go in. There's lots of technical words, technical things as far as the different types of research. There's an AB method, an ABA method, a BAB method. There's lots of different names and things for them. I'm not worried about that with this class. You can look at that some other point. The point of this class is to really learn the process. And so it's basically kind of, okay, when I collect my data, am I collecting one class's data and comparing it with another class? Am I comparing these 3 students with the rest of the class? Most of yours are going to kind of be more of a before and after. So I'm collecting data before versus then I'm going to integrate something and then I'm going to collect data after. And so just kind of knowing which of those you might. Triangulation of data is really going to strengthen its usefulness. Here are some different data collection methods that you might use. You could use portfolios. You may use observations, checklists. Portfolios we're all familiar with how those work. Interviews, it may be that I'm going to interview some other teachers. Maybe it's my I can't get my kids to turn in their homework as much as I want them to. I might interview some other teachers and find out what are they doing to collect homework. How do they get their kids to turn in homework? And so I might be interviewing them. It may be interviewing parents. It may be interviewing students. I really like you to understand there's kind of the differences between interviews and focus groups. Remember that there's advantages, disadvantages to both. This kind of quickly in a nutshell. Interviews, the advantage to that is you're usually doing that one-on-one, and you can ask those in-depth questions. You can get that person's view on what they think. If you're going to interview several people, it takes 10 minutes per time. That's going to be 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes for each one. So there's a time factor there. Focus groups, the advantage to that is you can do 4, 5, 6 people all at one time, and so it might be quicker. But the disadvantage to a focus group is, you could have somebody that talks way too much, somebody else who's not going to talk. Let's say there's 5 people in your group and 4 of them all think one thing, the 5th person who might be shy might decide, well, I'm not going to speak up even though I disagree with them. Sometimes it could go off track a little bit, and so there's advantages, disadvantages to both. You'd have to figure out which works for you. Another way you can get some data is from an observation. It's just going into classrooms, observing. For your project, you could have somebody come and observe you. You could observe your class, and so there's different ways to do observations. Checklists, simple ways to check off what you're seeing. Surveys and questionnaires, we talked about those a little bit last week, and I know you guys are in the process of have by this time submitted those for this week. But it's a way to get information from students, parents, staff, good information. We're all familiar with test scores or class scores, those kind of scores that we can get data from. Historical inquiry is basically looking back at data that we have to help with what we're currently doing. For instance, I'll try to make this quick, but a way I always think of how I use historical inquiry, when I first came to White Church, this would have been 8 years ago, I looked back at the data as far as state assessment scores, and the year before I came, state assessment scores were, not that high. They barely made AYP by like 0.1%. I looked at the year before, they were slightly higher. But then I looked at 3 years ago, and it was pretty high. I looked at 4 years ago, it was a little higher. And so it seemed like the last 4 years it had gone way down. And so that helped me to really know, because I looked then, okay, who's the staff? how much of that staff is still here, how's it gone, what else has changed in those 4 years. And because I did that, I was able to really see what changes I needed to make, because I knew most of those same teachers were here and they were capable of getting high performance from the students because they showed it 4 years ago. But what happened since then? And because I went and took that time to do that historical inquiry, my very first year at White Church, we got way up to where we were standard of excellence in the low 90s as far as students passing the state assessment my very first year, and we've stayed there ever since. And again, I'm not saying that to say, oh, look at me, I came in and I did such a great job. No, it wasn't that. It was that the teachers were capable of doing it, but something had taken place over those 4 years that took away from it. And all I had to do was figure out what that was, change a few little minor things, and we were right back to where we needed to be. But if I wouldn't have done that historical inquiry, I probably wouldn't have figured that out. That's just one example. Again, historical inquiry could just be if you have a 8th grade student that's struggling in reading, well, going back and looking at their 7th grade, 6th grade, 5th grade, 4th grade, kindergarten reading, and seeing, where did it happen? Has it happened since kindergarten? Did it just drop off at 6th grade? So there's lots of ways you could collect data. Those are a couple examples. Using qualitative and quantitative data, we want to make sure we're using both of those. And again, the next couple slides are going to explain those. Make sure you give it your all when you do a project. Don't just kind of do it halfway just because you have to do it for this class. Give it your all. That way you really understand if it really does work, if it's going to be beneficial to you. Don't make your decisions too quickly. A lot of times we start collecting data and it's like, oh, I know what to do. Well, let's wait till you get all of your data and really analyze it and then make your decision. Make sure any communication with people that are involved with this is clear and open. Use your supervisors. By that I mean, like if you have a principal, assistant principal, people that may come in and watch you to help you collect data, things like that. Use them if you can. And then we want to make sure we take action and do something. It doesn't do any good to collect data if we're not going to do something with it. So, qualitative data. Qualitative data examines the how and the why something is happening. Okay, so it's a lot of it can be based off of feelings, perceptions, beliefs, but it's really trying to figure out the how and the why behind something. So instead of just saying, "Oh, this kid has this score," well, why do they have this score? What's happening? How is this happening? So getting some more things behind the scene type things. Usually captures behavior in its natural setting. It's not like set up like some of our testing situations and things are. It's capturing behavior in the way it naturally happens. Understanding how things are perceived and interpreted by the players. And again, the players are the students, or it could be the parents, or it could be the teachers. But understanding how they perceive things. Relies a lot on verbal descriptions. It's a lot more flexible than quantitative, which we'll get to here in a minute. Some examples would be observations are very qualitative. If I go into your classroom and I observe you, I'm just taking some qualitative data usually about what I see you doing, what I see the students doing. Surveys and questionnaires could be qualitative because you're getting a lot of times their feelings about, well, why do you think you're not doing this, or why do you feel this is happening? You can get that from a survey. Interviews usually are going to be qualitative. If students are writing in journals, again, they're qualitative. Open-ended questions are usually qualitative. And if you examine videos, examine pictures, documents, usually a lot of that could be qualitative. So again, the qualitative is more on the how and the why something is. The quantitative is based more on the what. Usually quantitative has a lot to do with numbers. Right? There's numbers that are behind it. So it's pretty much cut and dry. This is what it is. It relies a lot on that numerical data. Some examples would be, it could also be surveys or questionnaires, which I know was on the qualitative side, but the quantitative part of surveys and questionnaires are the numbers. So I have the quantitative would be like 75% of the staff believes this. So that 75% is a quantitative number, but the qualitative would be about what they actually believe. And so the surveys kind of go back and forth between qualitative and quantitative. Observation that's more direct could be quantitative. For instance, if I'm going into your classroom and I'm really looking at student engagement, I'm keeping track of every minute how many students are engaged in what you're doing. That's a quantitative because I'm getting direct numbers from that. Test scores, any kind of scores that you get from daily assignments, any of that's going to be quantitative as well. So big difference. So a huge understanding, hopefully, of what qualitative versus quantitative. And again, we just want to make sure we're trying to get both of those in your projects. That way we kind of find out what's happening, but also the why and the how it's happening. So I hope that kind of sinks in and makes sense here. And really quickly, I just wanted to, we're not going to go through this whole scenario like it says on the top, but I just want to kind of mention this. Usually, I know that the test has changed as far as state assessments now, but the old state assessment, this is kind of what we look at class. We'd see the different students and where they scored, and we look at, okay, here's the numbers. Well, if we're really thinking about qualitative and quantitative, quantitative is going to be all these numbers you see in front of you, but the qualitative is going to be then, okay, well, why are these students like this? How did the historical inquiry might look at, well, we look at these scores and they look kind of average, but if I look at where they scored in third grade, since this is a fourth grade class, well, in third grade, if they were all higher than this, well, that tells me one thing. But maybe in third grade, majority of these students didn't even pass. Well, then this tells me something totally different. If I look behind the scenes and find out that half this class may be ESL newcomers, or this might be an inclusive special ed classroom, that tells me something different. And so it's really looking, I just kind of a rough example of, we don't want to just look at numbers as they are. We want to look at the behind the scenes of why things are happening, how are they happening, not just the what like we would see here. So hopefully here in the last 15 minutes I gave you a little example of qualitative versus quantitative, and we understand that a little better. And that's all we have for this week. Thank you, guys.